Good afternoon. I'm so pleased to be here for this important fireside chat on artificial intelligence with the Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the Honorable Andrea Campbell. I want to thank the Attorney General for taking time out of her busy schedule to join us today. General, it is an honor to host you here at UMass Boston, your public research university in the great city of Boston. And as we say in the old country, General, mi casa es su casa. Thank you also to Professor Nir Eskevitz, Director of the UMass Boston Applied Ethics Center, and our moderator, Alec Stubbs, a postdoctoral fellow at the Center, for convening this important conversation. I also want to acknowledge our Provost, Joe Berger, for his thoughtful guidance in framing UMass Boston's academic engagement with artificial intelligence. Thank you, Provost Berger. The rise of artificial intelligence is the story of the 21st century. To put it in historical perspective, we're in the dawn of a new planetary era. Like the beginning of reading and writing, like the agricultural revolution, the development of the steam engine, the invention of the computer, and the introduction of the smartphone, the evolution of artificial intelligence is ushering in a technological paradigm shift that is changing every aspect of human endeavors. Automation, which includes machine learning, mechanized bots, artificial intelligence software programs, is significantly impacting the nature of work. According to a Resume Builder report, more than 37% of business leaders in the country say that AI replaced workers in 2023. An Asana survey reports that about a third of employees say their work tasks are in fact, replaceable by artificial intelligence. All applications pertinent to AR are vast, varied, and deployable across multiple sectors, capable of analyzing extraordinary amounts of data, predicting outcomes, and assisting decision-making. While it isn't yet clear if the nature, the extent of AI displacement and whether it's overstated, this will be an issue that every graduate at UMass Boston will have to engage, face, and move with. But therein lies the important opportunity for higher education. We need to begin educating all our students for artificial intelligence future. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm clearly not artificially intelligence enabled at this moment. We believe that AI will continue to do all kinds of amazing things, like driving productivity to new heights and launching innovative technologies that will improve the quality of life for millions. Just yesterday, the journal Nature released new data from China, from Beijing, articulating how the city is using artificial intelligence models to predict dust storms now and moving forward, with enormous implications for health and wellness. Of course, AI applications are used in healthcare to detect disease and identify cancer cells. For example, AI can also assist in analyzing chronic conditions with lab data to ensure early diagnosis. And in the battle against climate change, AI is giving us powerful tools like automatic deployment of models, autonomous energy and water grids, climate models, data dashboards that can track deforestation, coral reef bleaching, and so much more. But like any transformative technology, AI raises social, ethical, and equity questions. This is what the data tell us in 10,000 years of human innovation, perhaps beginning with the agricultural revolution, the invention of agriculture, at every turn, new technologies create new opportunities. They also create new inequalities. And as we had seen, and as the Attorney General will discuss shortly, AI systems pose serious risks to consumers, including bias, a topic that the Attorney General and I discussed. We're both Bruins from the other Bruin world, UCLA. It was a UCLA scholar who first wrote the most systematic study of bias in artificial intelligence system, for which he was awarded the MacArthur Genius Award, Sophia Nobel. Matters pertinent to inequality and equity need to be sharply focused now and moving forward. We've also seen a flood of bogus AI-generated content that has influenced markets, damaged reputations and livelihoods, and sustained exclusionary and racist narratives. Our engagement with AI aims to ensure that UMass Boston education cultivates the ability to apply artificial intelligence to improve the ways we learn, we work, we live. The Paul English Applied Artificial Intelligence Institute will not only support the incorporation of AI competencies into the curriculum and provide students with the tools and apply AI skills they're going to need in tomorrow's workforce, it also will very importantly address the social, ethical, and equity challenges associated with artificial intelligence. As we develop new academic and research programs around artificial intelligence, we're asking basic questions. How can we use broadly inclusive education in applied AI as a tool for creating equitable opportunities in our communities? How can we teach the practical uses of AI as a transferable employment skill across all disciplines? How do we use AI for nursing? How do we use AI for engineering? How do we use AI for education and the like? Last but not least, how can we lead the creation of an evidence-based approach to using AI as a powerful teaching and learning tool that is anchored in ethical considerations now and in the future? Going forward, we want to incentivize AI as a public good. Paul English told the provost and I, when we were discussing this extraordinary transformational gift, he said, Marcelo, Joe, very shortly, either you're going to be on AI or you're going to be working for somebody who is on AI. This is how significant its impact will be in a variety of domains. Above all, of course, it's the matter of the administration of justice and the problems that flow from the invasion of dubious ideological and foreign interests as well in manipulating matters pertinent to what is sacrosanct for any democracy, and that is the administration of justice. The topics could not be more urgent, they couldn't be more sobering, and we could not have a better Attorney General in our country to address these issues with us. I am so honored to introduce our speaker. January 2023, Andrea Joy Campbell was sworn as the 45th Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, pledging to build economic prosperity and stability for all residents, prioritize the mental health and well-being of our children, stop cycles of incarceration and violence, and improve our education and transportation systems, and advance an agenda of equity across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. After overcoming hardship early in life, Attorney General Campbell was the first in her family to attend and graduate both college and law school, moving on to serve as legal services and employment attorney and as a legal counsel to then Governor Deval Patrick. General, I'm happy to tell you that this building was built with the brilliant vision of our former Governor Deval Patrick. And we only recently hosted him back in the campus. He had not been in the campus to see the buildings that were inaugurated, funded, and developed under his leadership. Attorney General Campbell was the first woman to represent District 4th on the Boston City Council in 2015, eventually being elected as City Council President in 2018, the first Black woman to hold the title. Please join me in welcoming a force of nature, the incomparable Attorney General of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, Andrea Joy Campbell.
Can you hear me? After that introduction.
So, Attorney General Campbell, we're very happy to have you here today, and you're sitting up here with two philosophers, so I don't know what that means, but...
You're using an entirely different lens, a little bit, but than we are in many ways, but
that's right.
Delighted to be here with both of you.
Philosophy's good for law school kids. So, of course, the necessary joke is that all of these questions were written by ChatGPT, but of course not. So we're very excited to have you here today, and I just wanted to begin sort of to allow you to set the stage, and we'll begin with you, Attorney General Campbell, and then we'll have Nir give his say on this as well. What do you take to be the biggest risks and the biggest benefits related to the emergence of AI technologies?
First of all, thank you, UMass. Thank you, Chancellor, for hosting me and members of my team. Thank you both for the work that you do and for, of course, participating in this conversation. I always think it's important to start from a place of gratitude, especially on a beautiful day like this. I also want to thank members of my team. So I don't do this work by myself. We actually brought back someone, Stephanie Lavelle, who was the former first assistant under then AG Riley, to come back. I guess we kind of pulled her a little bit out of retirement to own this portfolio of work. So there is someone in the office currently who is serving as a point person for internal and external as we develop our response to AI and algorithmic decision-making, which is really important. I also want to thank Amanda, who's sitting in of course, she's in the back. Classic, Amanda. Yes, you can give her a round of applause. A few folks are, because she's here. But Amanda, who is my senior legal advisor, she's been in the office for some time, who worked with Stephanie in the development of the advisory we put out today, but also as a part of a working group that we have in the office that covers our data privacy division, our consumer protection division, and our civil rights division. So it really is a cross-office intersectional response to all things AI. I'll just say a couple of things. I want this to feel like a conversation. We absolutely recognize the benefits. We put out an advisory today that is pretty straightforward. It is not long, and it's definitely not in legalese. So we invite all of you to read it, and it'll be posted on our website, and we'll also put it on our social media platforms. But just to make it clear that our civil rights laws, our data privacy laws, our consumer protection laws, and other regulations apply to AI in this decision-making that we're going to talk about today. But in that advisory, we start off not talking about the risks, we get to the risks, but we start off talking about the benefits, and that we welcome this technology as we should welcome all new technology when it is developed by someone and expanded upon and built upon, that there are benefits in some of our contexts that the Chancellor mentioned, in healthcare and other spaces too. We also use it, I'm going to speak from our lens, we use it in our office. They have significant AI discovery tools that allow us to be more efficient in our discovery processes. Our legal research that also allows us to be more efficient at times. There are AI legal research tools. We also, when this working group was brainstorming some of the benefits, someone mentioned as elders deal with loneliness, AI tools and the response to that. When you talk about national weather and how do we predict storms and other things that will come, these tools can be significant there. So I think the list is long, and I'm sure you guys can elaborate. And then the second piece, of course, the big bucket is the risk. And there are risks. We focus a lot on the bias that can exist in these systems, not just what you put in and how that can, of course, have bias in terms of input and who's putting what into the systems. And then the outputs, the results, the effect, and the discriminatory effect they can have in all of these contexts is very real, particularly when it comes to screening and tenant or healthcare decisions and other decisions. We talk about transparency and explainability, the risk there. Do you know that you're using AI? Do they have to tell you? And if you are engaging with an AI system, well, do you know what that is? Does the consumer, for example, have a sense of what they should expect or not expect? That's not necessarily clear. And even as you talk to suppliers of AI, they talk about it being a black box. Well, if they're confused, can you imagine the user being confused? So what are the questions that we need to ask, and how do we need to push systems to be more transparent? And I will this is why I brought notes, because there's a lot I want to stress today. I will also just talk about, of course, data privacy, real concerns about just the data that is collected, how it's being used, how it's being stored, the risk there. And then lastly, just security and integrity. We've heard about this terminology of AI hallucinating and what that may mean and the risk there. It could be a positive development, but then as it goes off into a realm we don't quite understand or expect, the risks and concerns there. But again, looking forward to the conversation, elaborating in more detail on some examples of this and how we look forward to working with folks here at UMass and other institutions that are involved in this state-of-the-art technology. And one last piece before I then shut up and turn it back to you, Alec, is I also appreciate the investment of Paul English and others into this incredible public institution. Public institutions, I don't think, get the attention they deserve. I graduated from Princeton, but I say they're not going to provide all the workers and folks we need in terms of our economic needs. So this public institution across the Commonwealth and all of its campuses is doing remarkable work. But to see you focused on AI and incorporating that into a curriculum for students, and maybe even graduate students as they go out into the world and interface with this technology is really exciting and really something to be celebrated. And just happy to be here with you and your staff and stakeholders in this incredible institution, in this beautiful institution. So thank you again for having me today.
No, that's great. So you touched on a lot there. And so let's break it down maybe step by step and go through some of the most important things I think we need to talk about. So the first one, I think, and it's pretty much entered the social imaginary at this point, is the idea of algorithmic bias. And we know that there are algorithmic biases that are at play in all kinds of AI systems, from the rental market to use in healthcare to determining bail to facial recognition technology. And of course, this directly affects Americans of color, and particularly Black Americans, considerably more than white Americans. But one of the difficulties is that, of course, all of this training data is being trained on systems that are themselves biased. So I'd like to hear you spell out how you think we overcome that issue, and at least what your office can do to try and mitigate some of those issues. And then for Nir as well, who I know will be interested in building off of this, is that a kind of two-way street? Is it possible for algorithms to deal with biases in a way that can be less biased than their potential training data sets? And if so, do the problems end there? So I'll start with you, Attorney General Campbell.
I will just say, so the advisory we put out today, and I think it was an advisory that was welcomed by numerous stakeholders, including those in the industry that supply this technology, those that procure it and use it. This question around, do our laws apply? Stephanie, who I mentioned earlier when we were having a conversation about the development of this advisory, mentioned that the same day we were having a meeting, the Globe put out an article saying our laws essentially need to catch up and we need to have a conversation about that. And we said, well, we don't think that's entirely true. We have some of the most progressive and robust consumer protection laws in Massachusetts in the country. Our discrimination law is the same. Our data privacy law is quite extensive and expansive. So we put out this advisory making it crystal clear that these new forms of technology, that our laws absolutely apply, that we have every intention, of course, of enforcing them. where we, for example, may see bias, and where under our consumer protection laws, for example, their product is put out and advertised to deliver a certain result, but we end up seeing a discriminatory effect. Whether it's done by a human or algorithmic system, they both are applicable in terms of the application of our laws. And I want to give credit to President Biden and Vice President Harris, who put out an executive order that named this same thing back in the fall. So this makes it crystal clear. It's like putting a stake in the ground where it has not been clear. I've been participating in conversations all across this country, in different venues, even participating on some panels with fellow AGs, where we talk about what is AI, what is this decision-making, all of these things, but no one then goes a step further to be really holistic, that our laws are applicable, and that we have tools to address some of the bias that may exist. We have tools in case your data, for example, that is gathered by these systems is compromised. We have a tool to enforce against that. We have tools to push for companies to be more transparent and to actually make sure folks know when they're using AI and what it may mean in that transaction. We have tools to take on deepfakes. And folks' ability to use these tools of voice cloning and other things that they're using AI and this manipulation to scam folks out of something, to defraud them. We have tools to go after that under our consumer protection laws. So we make that crystal clear while, of course, highlighting the benefits. And we do know in certain contexts, particularly when you talk about bias and discriminatory effect and results or intent, that because this tends, of course, to affect people of color and, as you named, Black residents, these tools can perpetuate systemic inequities. We have tools to combat that. And this is the first step in what will be meaningful work in the office going forward on what that enforcement could look like, working with stakeholders, of course, in the office, but those external to the office, too.
So thank you so much, Attorney General, and thanks for including me. So like a lot of new technologies, AI systems can be vehicles for exacerbating bias issues along the lines that have just been discussed. And I completely agree with what was said. The data that's collected can be biased. The models that are used to manipulate the data can be separately or additionally biased. So for example, you would use a zip code as a predictor for the capacity to pay, and that would be a sort of to repay a loan, and that would be a biased model working on biased data. So you could have two levels of the problem. The one thing, Alec, that you mentioned is one thing that's interesting about AI as a vehicle of bias, that in some ways it's more reversible than other vehicles of bias. So if the data was fixed, which is a big if, and if the models were supervised and fixed, AI is potentially less biased than human beings. And has the potential, again, if the economic incentives are there, if the political incentives are there, if the policy and legal incentives are there. I mean, think about something like Tesla. It's an analogy. Tesla has very strong incentives and other electric cars to be involved in as few motor vehicle accidents as possible, because that's what is going to sell Teslas. And so they will work with the best data they have and with the best predictive models they have to be involved in the fewest amount of accidents. Imagine an AI system that was making hiring and firing and bail decisions based on the best kind of data and the best kind of models that were supervised. You could, I mean, just like there's probably good reason to assume that electric cars in the end will reduce the number of fatalities, even though they haven't done it yet. And arguably there's even an analogous, that's more controversial, there's even an analogous argument, and we're not there, about AI weaponry. There might be a similar kind of argument about the reduction of bias. For me, one question, and Alec, this goes to something you mentioned. For me, one question that's interesting is, assume this kind of utopia happens, and the AI systems are less biased or improve levels of bias. Is that the end of what we should be thinking about or worried about with AI? Is that then sort of, have we reached the sunlit uplands and the problem is done? And I think we haven't, because as it does this, and especially if it becomes better than us at stuff that matters to us, human beings will be making fewer and fewer judgments in these areas that matter to us, and there's a sort of potential that we become less of ourselves in important ways. But that's a separate area altogether.
So one of the other things you mentioned is this issue of data privacy. And really, we can't talk about AI at all without talking about data privacy, because the firms that are making use of these tools and building these tools are building these tools specifically on the collective data that we all contribute to. Nir and I were talking earlier, there's a great piece in the New York Times today on the development of OpenAI and its use of essentially scrubbing the entire internet. And then it ran out of things to scrub data for. So it invented a tool to scrub all of YouTube, and now it doesn't have anything else to scrub. And so the worry is that they're gonna have to create synthetic data, or increasingly create tools that capture our attention so that we can create more data for these firms. So there's a deep problem here that's related to the profit motive, but is tied to our data privacy. So how does your office have the tools, and what do those tools look like to actually deal with this? Is it a general data protection regulation type model that we see in the EU? I mean, where do we need to push this thing? Because I think there need to be real radical changes in order to address this issue.
I appreciate the question. Just before I even answer it, I want to just add to what Nir was saying on sort of some of the other potential risks, right? But also some of the benefits that could exist. There is a possibility that you can reduce bias depending on what the inputs are, and who human is informing those systems, right? I think that's a real challenge. I participate in more panels and also make sure that I am learned here. One of the concerns is that it tends to be just folks who are white who are informing these systems, and the downside of not having a diverse set of folks involved. And I think that's true for any industry or anywhere we sit, the importance of diversity in informing all types of conversations and systems. But the other societal potential risk or harms is you improve a system so much that you continue to have labor shortages. You know, some of us in here won't have the same job because you will be replaced by technology, right? And so I know unions and other stakeholders are thinking about that. Well, how then do you transition our residents to other employment opportunities or develop their skill set even further so that maybe they are informing some of this technology or involved, particularly as you look at aging residents who are not leaving the workforce earlier. So expensive to live here in Massachusetts and other places. So real harm. We also think in the office about equity, any new technology, broadband we have talked about, social media, just anything that is new, who has access to it? Where is it available? I mean, we're still talking about the gaps in access to broadband and Wi-Fi and internet services. So that's a real concern. If this is something that is indeed beneficial, how do we make sure that our folks of all demographics, all geographic locations have access to these tools that can be helpful and supportive in different ways? And then in the context of just democracy and misinformation, real concerns around what is disseminated in various places, including on our social media platforms, that is just not accurate, not truth, and real concerns around that. So on the data piece, so I just wanted to name some of those other additional public harms that we should all be mindful of. The data piece is significant. One thing in our office, we're really blessed to have a data privacy division that is taking on all things data. And kudos to Jared and his team. It's a small and mighty team, but they are working very hard, in including our multi-state investigation and complaint against Meta and Instagram and the harms that those platforms are having on our young people. They are owning that and so many other things. Data breaches that are occurring, obligation to report this to our office and other entities, and for us to respond in real time to folks where these breaches exist to say, what are you doing for the consumer? How are you getting back to the consumer? One, to let them know it happened. Two, to make sure they have certain types of tools to respond. It may be, for example, credit tools. If there is certain information that is out there, to make sure that is not being used against you in some way, or that you are receiving some type of harm. So we are pushing data privacy breaches responses in real time, even right now, from some of our large institutions. Really concerned about this context because we don't know all the time what data is being gathered, what it's being used for. And our legal tools are significant to be able to push for that transparency and accountability, and for real tools and services to be given to our consumers and residents to respond. But where we are short, and this is why in the office we're always talking about what are our tools. One is our litigation and enforcement tools, as spelled out in the advisory. Another is our engagement tool, which this is it, letting you know some of what we do every day on your behalf. A third is our grant-making tool. We're able to put out funds to different entities to help with the problem. But our fourth one that is just as significant is our policy and government tool. So showing up at the State House to push for legislative change and policy change is significant. In this context, especially significant, came out recently with various stakeholders in support of the Location Shield Act, which says, as we are engaging on devices and various platforms, our location data, our information, which we think is and have a right for it to be private, is being utilized. And right now, people can sell that information, including where you get your health care in the context of reproductive justice, if you're going to get reproductive health care somewhere, where you're going to do that, where do you go to, your kids go to school, this information can be sold to third-party brokers and used in ways that are extremely troubling, including by folks who are against reproductive justice and care, including by white supremacists, and we're taking on those folks too. They exist in Massachusetts, sadly. But this information that is critical being used against you. So we're in the State House right now fighting for legislative changes in this context that will give us all more tools to take on that, which we currently don't have. So I think we're thinking about what we have and what we don't have, and using them as best we can to solve a particular problem. And in this open AI market that the New York Times and others have talked about, we have some tools that are effective and then some that we have to go and get in order to bring about the transparency and accountability that we all want to see.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, one of the biggest cases recently is the FTC fined BetterHelp, for anyone who has made use of BetterHelp, for selling your personal data to third parties, right? And so we need to be thinking, very intently about how we go after those tools and what those look like in order to deal with those issues.
Just if I could, in that specific context, Alec, I guess zooming out a tiny bit, it's probably important to keep in mind that the basic interest of large social media companies isn't the preservation of democracy, and it isn't the reduction of bias, but it's making money and maximizing shareholder benefit. That's the economic model. That's their legal obligation, actually. It's a bad law, but that's their legal obligation. So just one anecdote that really speaks to that. One of the, from this recent New York Times reporting, one of the large social media companies, when they realized that they ran out of data to train the models on, and again, the best chance of making these models emulate the function of the human mind, which is the basic purpose, is the more data they have, the better it is. They ran out of data on the internet. They transcribed all the voice from YouTube. What do you do now? And they were seriously, I mean, this is hard to sort of believe, but they were seriously discussing buying Simon & Schuster, the publishing house, so that they could use all of Simon & Schuster's catalog to train data, which then makes you think, what new books would Simon & Schuster want to acquire? They probably would have to be very long so that they would contain more data. So the whole incentive structure there is pretty weird, and there is a disconnect about what matters to companies like Meta, like X, and what matters to the Attorney General, what matters to the people the Attorney General represents and works for. I think that's probably important to remember.
I'm just going to add on that point. It's so true. One piece that we sort of alluded to is this dissemination. We currently don't have the tools that we would want and need to hold, for example, social media platforms accountable for what content they put out there that may cause harm, misinformation, undermine our democratic institutions. How do we go after that conduct of disseminating that if you know it to be untruthful or some other or biased in some way? Hence why we have to be working with the legislature. The FTC, of course, at the federal level too is concerned about this, and we're actively working with them on a whole host of things. But it is significant and one that folks should pay attention to, because their incentive is not necessarily to roll up their sleeves, come to the table and work with their AGs to work on data privacy concerns, work on this dissemination concern, or even the changing of Instagram, for example, and what decisions are made using these algorithms to put out certain type of conduct. If they know it to harm, for example, young girls, which we have numerous examples of that, and them choosing not to change a design feature of the platform after internal folks said, we're concerned about the effect that the filters can have on young girls, it running that decision up to the top and saying, we're not as concerned. And it is because of this incentive model. And so AGs across the country, both Republican and Democrats, it's probably one place we're all working together, which is a good thing, to take on some of these platforms for all the reasons as we just described. And one that folks should absolutely care about as these platforms are pulling us further in to engage in different ways, not just our young kids. I'm a mom of 2 young boys, but also to shop, to do other things on these platforms that is significant. And they can be effective tools, but they can also be tools that bring about significant risk and harm to you, your family, your business, and other things as well.
So I know that time is somewhat limited, so I want to get through a series of other questions and then we can open it up to the floor. The next thing I want to talk about is housing, which I'm sure no one in the audience is worried about, and particularly in the city of Boston. One of the big worries about the development and implementation of certain AI technologies in the housing market in particular, I can think of 2 main worries, and I'm interested to know how your office can deal with these worries. The first worry is a worry about the development of tools that, in a sense, can allow for landlords to collude with one another to increase rents beyond typical market prices, right? Because they have access to information far and beyond what the typical consumer and renter has. So that's one issue, and there are major AI tools that make use of that capacity. The second is dealing with essentially a contemporary form of redlining, which is getting back to the issue related to algorithmic biases, but again, the same kinds of practices, but this time without the kind of agential oversight happening person to person, but now within the context of algorithms themselves. So I wonder how your office thinks about those 2 things.
So I mentioned earlier this working group and why it's critical that it happen across the office. We have an antitrust division, which is vital to these conversations too. And put aside, I guess we could have a whole nother panel discussion on who holds all the data and who are these platforms. Major companies, it's not a lot, right, when you think about the big players, and real concerns around that. But there are ways in which to look at, I think, both. Where I think we're probably more focused is on the latter piece. And why? Because we get complaints from consumers. We always tell folks, if you have a problem, you can call our office, you can reach out to us on our website, you can file a complaint through various means to our office. And of course, folks will complain about, I went to buy a home, I went to get some, apply for a mortgage, or some tenant screening process, and I was denied, and I was not given a rationale as to why. And they thought it was maybe because of zip code analysis or criminal background is probably a large concern in your query. And the law is really specific on what you can take into account and what you can't in some of this decision making. So the question is you have a non-human doing it and putting in certain inputs, and as Nir mentioned earlier, the zip code piece. in deciding certain things is very flawed data if it's not put in a fuller context, especially if you think about redlining and the history of redlining in Massachusetts and in this country. It's going to bring about certain biases in that decision-making and ultimately the output. Our office has the consumer protection tools, the discrimination tools to take that on, to enforce against that. And this advisory makes it clear that we will do that. One thing we also want to make sure that our consumers and residents know is that as they're interacting with some of these screening companies and agencies, that they also want to be mindful. Is it a human that is taking information from you? Is it a system, et cetera? Just to educate folks, I think, is really important. And if you think about, just this morning, Amanda and I were talking about the criminal record piece. It's supposed to be a very individualized decision, looking at someone's history and saying, okay, well, is it old, the date in which it occurred? What's the full context there? What were the full circumstances, et cetera? Because then you might decide this person is absolutely still qualified for this job. This person is absolutely still qualified to rent this apartment to. We're also seeing in the context of public housing. You get certain type of public benefits, say Section 8 or other vouchers. It is illegal to discriminate against those folks because of that public assistance. So if you have a system or an algorithmic decision-making system that just puts this information in with no full context, it can very much be used against you. And so we have tools in office to be able to enforce that, and we make that clear through the advisory that we plan on doing that. And active ongoing matters with some of these examples. Obviously, I can't go into full detail on all of that, but making it clear that we want to educate folks on what they should be concerned about, and that we want to use our legal tools to respond.
Okay, so one last thing, and this is shifting from a consumer perspective to a workers' rights perspective. Something near and dear to my own heart, some issues that I work on. One of the big worries with the introduction of AI systems into the workforce is that workers themselves become increasingly subject to forms of algorithmic domination. So we can think in the context of gig workers, Uber and Lyft drivers feeling like they need to respond to surge pricing, or algorithms dictating based on consumer reviews and customer reviews whether or not they can remain on the platform. Amazon warehouse workers being subject to forms of surveillance that are run and moderated by AI systems. So again, thinking, what are the tools that your office has to be able to respond to this kind of algorithmic domination in the workplace? And how does that differ from traditional forms of addressing workers' rights?
It's a great question. While we may have more limited legal tools to address that head on, we're mindful of it. So we have laws and other authorities in the office. And I have to also acknowledge the governor, Governor Healy, and Lieutenant Governor Driscoll. They also have a task force actively working on these issues, particularly in the context of innovation and continuing that innovation here in Massachusetts. But we're working with them, their tech division, and other stakeholders in the administration on guidelines and other things where we think they may be better situated, or others. As we procure this, what do we have to be mindful of? How do we leverage the tools we have, all of us, to not only bring these concerns to the attention of an Uber and Lyft? We have a lawsuit actively against Uber and Lyft for the misclassification of those drivers as independent contractors when we indeed think they are employees. And when you are an employee, there's a whole host of benefits that are available to you, whereas when you're an independent contractor, that's not the case. But these same conversations allow us, through various tools, to be able to talk about other concerns that we have for a driver in ways in which we want to bring about greater benefits for them, what their not just their risks are, how much more difficult it is for them to be able to do their job. But I wouldn't say that our office alone has all the tools or legal tools to deal with that. But we do see our tools as being able to be leveraged to have greater conversations, to convene folks, to solve a particular problem, using some of these other tools, and then, of course, using other stakeholders who are better positioned to take on the challenge.
Just I'd like to add one small piece on that. There's also a special mental health harm that accrues from being supervised by algorithms, from being evaluated and surveyed by algorithms, at least with a human boss crappy as though they may be, you can negotiate, you can push back. It's not clear that you can do that with an AI, or you'd get a. I was being very mild. That was my PG-13 version. So alienation would set in, at heightened levels with that kind of supervision.
Yeah, so we've got about 15 minutes remaining, and so I think it's a good time to open it up to the floor for Q&A. So if anyone has a question? Yes, we've got one right here. Oh, if you'll wait 1 second for the microphone.
Hi, I have two questions, and before that, thank you so much for this enlightening session on AI. I was kind of in the dark about the civic rights part, aside from the theoretical things that we already know. So you touched upon two things. So first, I would like to bring up accountability. So when we're talking about accountability, hoping that level 3 or level 4 Tesla cars hits the market in the next couple of years, or talking about AI in healthcare, such as surgical robots, mostly the accountability is on the person sitting behind the wheels or the investigating doctor as against the machine if something goes wrong in that incident. So how do you see policymaking shifting towards a more technology-friendly atmosphere where doctors or people who are using AI cars are not skeptical of adopting it in fear of getting accountable for something that goes wrong on part of the technology?
I mean, absolutely. So from my perspective, your question, sort of raises a fascinating philosophical agency of like what happens to agency in the age of AI. I think it's an open question. Once they actually get a lot better, who's actually driving those Teslas? Is it the person behind the wheel? I mean, by the way, looking left and right on the highway doesn't always seem to be the person behind the wheel that's driving them. Is it Tesla driving them from wherever their headquarters are? I mean, at some point, the question of agency and personhood, I mean, it has changed in legal history several times, and I think this might be a new permutation.
And I'll just add, when we put out the advisory, we try to put out specifics where our laws would be applicable. And in this context, you put out a product that promises to deliver a certain thing and it doesn't. Or you put out, or a deep fake comes out, for example, and that is used to then scam someone or defraud an elder, for example, out of either their money, their home, or something else. We make it clear that we actually have legal tools to go after folks who created those systems, those suppliers, and hold them accountable. And that any investigation that we do will look at all the decision-making, the sort of the full chain, right? It's not necessarily one particular actor. It could be a group of folks, and that we have existing laws currently to hold folks accountable in these contexts where you are promised something, but ultimately not deliver that product. That with warranty issues there, false and deceptive advertising under our consumer protection laws, unfair and deceptive practices. Maybe there's some data privacy concerns. So the whole point of putting out this advisory was to say there's a whole array of laws and regulations, local and federal, in state level, obviously, to be able to go after these folks to hold them truly accountable on behalf of that user. Where there are limitations, and I think on the dissemination piece we talked about earlier, the data privacy piece on the data being able to sell that to just anyone to use in harm, we think there are better legislative solutions that we must be at the table for in order to give us the tools to hold more people accountable in certain contexts. So this is obviously going to be ever-changing, but I think we want folks to make it crystal clear, we want to be at the table and in the conversation with everybody, including those who supply it, which is important. No one should be shocked by this advisory that came out, including folks who generate this information, who utilize it. They've asked for it. We want to be clear, are the laws applicable and in what context? So we have an opportunity to continue to work with this large ecosystem across the country to really think about ways in which to hold folks accountable when it goes terribly wrong. And we have responsible suppliers. We have folks who I think are looking to be responsible. And so our goal is to work with them too.
So I have one more question. So this relates to what you mentioned.
So do we have another question before we get to that first? Yes? Okay. Our photographer.
What up, Alex? My question is, as just an everyday consumer, a lot of what we've been talking about is these companies selling our data. Is there anything that we can do, say, right now, today, to not add fuel to this fire, to not give them that data, or is it just you just have to deal with it if you want to use social media or all these other platforms? Thank you.
I'll start. It's a great question. I think for us, at least in the AI context, that transparency piece is critical. It's what data, we don't know all the time what data is being received from you as the user and how it then is being stored, utilized, protected. So again, in this advisory context, we said we need to push, we put this out not only to say we're going to, at some point, if needed, bring enforcement actions, but also hopefully to also continue to open up the conversation with providers of all types of technology where they take data, to have a conversation around that. How might they change in which their products, for example, to allow you to understand in a more deeper way what data is being used, how it's being used, to explain that to you. So we have concerns about the lack of transparency and accountability, or I should say explainability. There are some tools that we have to push this, but even then it's difficult because they'll require you sometimes to opt in and you have to read some long 5-page user agreement where you check the box. We're having internal conversations around, okay, is that fair to the user? And I think this is a conversation across the country. Should it be more, you're required to explain to me what you are doing with my information? But that's ongoing, and I think it is not as user-friendly as it should be in this moment in time. And I wish I had sort of brighter news and more hopeful news in this moment in time, but I think it's just being mindful as you get on all of these platforms, download more apps, use your device more, to just be mindful that data is being collected and can very much be used against you. And I just want to add one point. I was just in Washington, D.C. with Congresswoman Underwood talking about Black maternal health, and we're doing a lot in that space. And new technologies being developed right here in Massachusetts to help folks have access to all types of things that could actually support a birthing mom after giving birth. But then the question becomes the data that is collected through these apps that may provide, say, greater access to mental health care. Can these apps be used against you later if something goes terribly wrong and, for example, the state gets involved and is threatening to take away your kids? And you then have to explain, well, wait a minute, no, I'm getting care and I'm fully capable of taking care of my kids. But can that data be used against you? And this was a real concern for the Congresswoman and others. So we have some tools now, but they are not as probably as effective and impactful as we would like them to be.
Just a brief follow-up on that. There's probably some things that you, like this afternoon, can do to increase your data privacy, like download a more privacy-conscious browser like DuckDuckGo instead of the one that you're using, and change some of the settings on some of the main apps that you're using. More broadly, what's interesting is there's this myth, for example, that Gen Z people no longer care about privacy. It's not true. There's surveys that suggest that they actually do care about privacy a great deal, but they're a little cynical about their capacity to preserve it. So it's like a sort of ambivalence where they care, but they're not sure. A little bit along the lines of your question, they're skeptical about the capacity for doing anything about it. There is a business opportunity there for companies who both actually take data privacy seriously and advertise that they take data privacy seriously. And some companies have actually taken advantage of that. So, I mean, the other thing on a slightly more collective level that people like you can do is to make it known wherever you make things known that you care about these things, because that creates incentives.
And sure, go ahead.
I'm going to just scope out and then back in again. We've been talking about democracy, threats to democracy. Could you talk a little bit about the world, the global sector, and how the global sector intersects with our conversation today about civil rights and about bias?
I think in the at least speaking to what I said earlier about democracy, the rule of law, misinformation, real concerns, obviously, we're in an election year, right? I think all eyes, and most folks don't pay attention to the fact we have an election every year in Massachusetts, so just gonna put a plug for that. You should be civically engaged every year, voting every year. But in this year, obviously, the presidential always gets more attention. And there are real concerns about the information, particularly on social media platforms, and the algorithms that are used to put this information out, to disseminate it broadly, to cater it to you, depending on what your browser history is, et cetera. Obviously, this has some global implications about who's driving that information, where is it coming from. We talked about deep fakes and voice cloning, even things that I am learning about that are really concerning, particularly for public figures, and having someone actually use your likeness and your voice to sound like it is you when it is not. And so our advisory makes it clear that we have some tools to be able to go after that. But that dissemination piece is still very challenging for our office, and I think every AG office across the country would say the same, to be able to go after. And there are real concerns, and hence why we're here today, not to sugarcoat the fact that when you have new technology and significant benefits, including to Massachusetts and our innovation, there are real concerns about the risk when using some of these technologies for ill purposes. And that may, of course, not be the intent of the person who created it, but folks are smart. So a lot of implications. We're obviously connected globally in so many different ways, but real implications. I will say, lastly, one thing we love about Massachusetts, I love being the AG of this state, our laws are very advanced compared to other states in these contexts. We're actively working on data privacy legislation, but even our office is at the State House informing those conversations and the tools that we would need to be able to expand our enforcement here, to hold folks accountable, or to be able to take information off of a website. But it's going to require state and federal partners in particular. And if we didn't think an election mattered, this year it does, because who's at the federal level does matter in terms of who we're able to work with on some of these issues.
Maybe one quick follow-up on the AI international relations kind of intersection. So one example that brings out these questions is the pending TikTok legislation to either have TikTok sell off its American assets to an American company or be banned. And the argument broadly, in addition to data privacy argument, was that TikTok is a tool for a potential influence operation more effective than Facebook was in 2016. I think that's largely plausible, but I also think that it's a red herring in the sense that, the issue there is a huge amount of people under 30 get their news from TikTok. I don't remember if it's half or 30%. Either way, that's a lot. I think the problem is that you get your news from TikTok, not that TikTok tries to influence you. If you got your news not from TikTok, you would not be subject to that level of influence. That's a bad place to get news from, because they are not in the business of informing people. They're in the business of advertising to people on the basis of staying on their platform. And that's not just true of TikTok, by the way. It's true of all the others. But addressing that, namely that there's something fundamentally wrong about getting your news from TikTok. Unfortunately, there's an inescapable personal responsibility piece there. You're responsible for where you get your information and your information hygiene by yourself. And there's an institutional piece there that this is a skill that schools should be teaching, basically beginning in middle school. And by and large, they're really not. Alec and I just started a pilot program with that, with City Hall in Boston, but there's very little of that going on.
And I'll just add, our office, we're towards the end, right? We're not at the beginning on that information, knowledge sharing. We're out here educating folks. We'd love for them to come to our office to get more information, hence why we're telling folks. But the average person in Massachusetts doesn't know the AG's office exists. They have no idea what we do and all the tools that we have available to us to protect them. And I would argue the AG's office is doing something every day that actually interacts and affects the lives of constituents every day. And so we're getting out here through these types of engagements, but it is that personal responsibility piece. We push folks to get out there and also learn from some of their governmental agencies or public institutions.
So we've got time for 2 questions. We have one over here, and then Chris.
My main concern now is online banking. That's really scaring me because I'm at that age, I'm retired. And they're pushing us to go online, pay your bills. I don't want to do that, but they're making it really hard for us when we go pay our bills at certain things. Then they want to charge you fees, now. I don't want to do online banking because of this AI and breach. Since I've done online banking, I tried it one time. I said, no. So I pulled back. But now it's getting to the point where even I get letters from the bank about breaching because of the AI. And like I said, what are we going to do about the banking system? Because it's becoming a real problem with breaching.
Whether it's banking, lending, financial products, et cetera, I feel like we're taking on everything in that context. I will just stress, we have some team members here. If you as an individual are engaged with something that is troubling with any institution and you feel like you're being harmed or there's some, just something doesn't feel right to you, please engage our team members and get information before you go. We want to continue to share that. In the context of elders, we started an elder justice unit in the office because every scam you can think about, when we're collecting data on who was being targeted, it is elders. And we remind folks that there are certain obligations that companies have to deliver to you unless you opt out of it, but they still have to deliver the other service, right? So for example, there's some people who still want to get their bills via paper and not via email or text. And while we may work on the climate issues with respect to that, they still have that right. So in the context of the financial institutions generally, we're looking at the bias there, whether in how they deliver their services, or the screening mechanisms to receive a service or a product from a financial institution, and where AI or certain decision-making may create bias and discriminatory effect. We're looking at all of that, and where appropriate, we'll enforce. I think on the knowledge piece, it's also really important, so please engage with our office as best you can. One thing I also want to add, when you mentioned fees, we put out a strategic plan recently that also is in layman terms and not legalese. We said we'd focus on 5 different things. I won't name all of them because of time, but one is everything having to do with our young people in particular, including their economics, and in our elders as well, just vulnerable populations that are our target for many things. But the other thing we said we'd focus on is economics and affordability and the tools that we have in our office to be able to deal with this. This advisory goes into that a little bit, but junk fees. We're actively reviewing regulations right now. All those hidden fees that are attached to, I think, almost everything you do. You thought it was going to be $100, and then at the end of the transaction, it's $300. So just fees generally, working with the FTC, I think our proposed regulations actually go a step further than even the feds. So we're actively thinking about ways to protect the consumer. Again, another useful tool of our office is protecting you. So we want you to know that. But there are ways in which you can continue to have your system as you want it. And if you feel like you're getting pushback from your respective institution on that, please reach out to our office. We want to be helpful.
Okay, final question.
Thank you very much, Attorney General. I wanted to ask whether you think that we in Massachusetts and you in the Attorney General's office have tools to protect us from automated government surveillance systems. We talked all about private stuff, but ShotSpotter and license plate scanners and facial recognition and the gang database. I mean, these are all surveillance systems that are getting more and more automated. And I'm wondering if you and the Attorney General's office feel like you have the legislative tools to push back against, local and state government agencies that are doing this kind of surveillance. Thanks.
It's a great question. I think we do have some tools there. This is public facing, but we have some ongoing investigations looking right here, even in Boston, that are meaningful and significant in terms of their police department and policing practices. And I don't want to suggest we don't work with them frequently. We do on a whole bunch of things. But we have open matters, and that's been in the public sphere before, including the gang database and concerns around the gang database. I will just add, I think, when we were putting out this advisory, one thing as a team we were talking about, hence why we engaged the governor's task force and their technology division at the state level and in the administration, was you can't go out and tell private sector folks what they should and shouldn't be doing around bias, transparency, explainability, security, data, integrity, and so much more, and not put up a mirror in terms of our governmental agencies. So we're actively working with the administration, probably on a joint survey. I know they're also probably going to release guidelines at some point for governmental agencies, how they procure this information, what are their considerations, et cetera. We're informing some of that, asking the same questions that we're asking for a private sector stakeholder, the same for our governmental agencies, and expecting the same level of robust discussion and response. Something goes terribly wrong with someone's data, well, who's holding who accountable? And we have a role to play in that too. We represent state agencies, not every single one, but most, in legal proceedings. We see that as a significant tool to push agencies to do better, to be better, particularly in this context. So taking that on as well.
Okay, so that's all the time we have, and I thank you so much for being here. And this is a conversation that 6 months from now will probably look very different. So maybe we'll have to do it again because there will be new technologies. But please join me in thanking Attorney General.
Thank you. Thank you.